In an effort to bring every last person into the system, so to speak, governments, globalist forces, and the United Nations want to make sure that every human being on the planet has a government-issued identification card, complete with biometric data. Indeed, the recently approved UN Sustainable Development Goals, also known as Agenda 2030, explicitly calls for providing legal identity and birth registration for all. A parallel effort led by the same forces pushing globalists, meanwhile, hopes to abolish cash and move toward a cashless global society in which every transaction can be tracked. And with funding from US taxpayers and various tax-exempt foundations controlled by the establishment, both of those visions could become a reality in the not-too-distant future, at least if humanity does not push back. The UN's deeply controversial Agenda 2030, marketed as an effort at transforming our world, is essentially a recipe for global socialism, as this magazine has documented. Everything from national and international wealth redistribution to targeting children as agents of change is explicitly demanded in the scheme, formally adopted by every national government and dictatorship on Earth in September. Buried deep within the massive text, which outlines 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 specific targets, is another key piece of the globalist puzzle. By 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration, reads Target 16.9. In other words, the UN and its member regimes are practically putting a bullseye on the back of every human being who still exists outside of the globalized economic and political system, such as the hundreds of millions of people who do not have government IDs, bank accounts, government benefits, permits to exist / build / farm / hunt / procreate / emit CO2, and more. Goal 16 of Agenda 2030, which includes about a dozen individual targets, also offers some other important hints as to the real agenda behind the UN's latest 15-year plan for mankind. The goal itself is listed as promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all and build effective, accountable and inclusive institutions at all levels. That might sound nice to the untrained observer. UN documents almost always use innocent-sounding language developed by PR experts and marketing gurus to conceal the real agenda. However, within Goal 16, not to mention the equally dangerous 16 other goals for humanity, are contained multiple troubling provisions. Among them, promote the rule of law at the national and international levels. Who exactly would be making this law at the international level is not explained, though UN Chief Ban Ki-moon offered a clue when he claimed the UN, which is widely ridiculed as the dictator's club, was actually the Parliament of Humanity. Goal 16 also includes a target to broaden and strengthen the participation of developing countries in the institutions of global governance. When the UN says developing countries, it means the mostly autocratic regimes ruling over poor countries. And when it says global governance, it really means global government, as countless globalists have explained. So, put simply, Goal 16 is a call for a more powerful system of global governance with more power for third world dictators. Also part of Goal 16 is a target to significantly reduce illicit financial and arms flows. To reduce the illicit flow of money and arms, of course, money and weapons along with those responsible for the financial flows, buyers and sellers, and gun owners must also be tracked. And since cash and unregistered weapons are impossible to track, it follows that something needs to change. No wonder, then, that the UN wants to provide legal identity for all, including birth registration, to every person on the planet. After all, without such a tool for tracking every person, it would be impossible to track all money, arms, opinions, and ultimately, dissent. Various international mechanisms dealing with gun control and financial control have proliferated in recent years. On the gun control front is the UN Arms Trade Treaty, essentially a plan for a planetary gun grab, On financial flows, the IMF, the Bank for International Settlements, the UN, the World Bank, and other outfits have been hard at work developing a global regulatory and monetary regime. But this is only the start, as the UN has made clear. The self-styled Global Law Enforcement Agency Interpol is already boasting that when police stop someone, they will be consulting global databases to determine who they are stopping. And if the UN gets its way, that is exactly where this is all going. In a widely republished analysis of the UN's agenda, The Beginning of the End, author Michael Snyder, who publishes the popular Economic Collapse blog, argues that the UN is plotting to implement universal biometric identification for all of humanity by 2030. This new agenda truly is a template for a new world order. And if you dig into the subpoints for these new global goals, you find some very alarming things, he wrote, citing SDG 16.9 on global identification and registration as an example. Citing the UN's partnership with technology firm Accenture to implement a biometric regime that reports refugee information to a central database in Geneva, Snyder also noted that the UN is already hard at work in making its goal a reality. Snyder points to a news report on the UN High Commissioner for Refugees and its use of biometric technology to identify and track refugees. Working with Accenture, the UN agency behind the ongoing influx of refugees into the West is using what is known as the Biometric Identity Management System, BIMS, to collect facial, iris and fingerprint biometric data and to provide refugees with official identification papers. All of that information is then reportedly collected in a database housed in Switzerland. Another media report cited by Snyder, which deals with World Bank efforts to foist biometric IDs on the planet under the guise of a program dubbed Identification for Development, IT4D, makes clear that the Accenture identification system will ultimately reach far beyond refugee camps. What the elite want to do is to make sure that everyone is in the system, Snyder continued. It is a system that they control and that they manipulate for their own purposes. That is one of the reasons why they are slowly but surely discouraging the use of cash all over the world. Every time the elite propose something for our good, it somehow always results in them having more power and more control. I hope that people will wake up and see what is happening. Major moves toward a one-world system are taking place right in front of our eyes, and yet I hear very, very few people talking about any of this. Indeed, the push for a global cashless society and the global effort to impose biometric ID systems on every human being are inseparable from each other. Consider, for example, the Better Than Cash Alliance launched in September of 2012 by the controversial Ford Foundation. The Better Than Cash Alliance partners with governments, the development community and the private sector to empower people by shifting from cash to electronic payments, reads the description of the scheme on the Alliance's website. Other organizations involved in the plan are the taxpayer-funded U.S. Agency for International Development (USAID), the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Clinton Development Initiative, bailed-out megabanks credit card giant Visa, Coca-Cola, the communist regime ruling Nepal, the Islamist regime in Pakistan, and more. The United Nations is also at the heart of the plan, with the UN Capital Development Fund serving as the Alliance's secretariat. Other UN outfits involved in the scheme include the World Food Programme and the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP, and even the UN Secretariat. Numerous third world governments and official agencies are listed on the Alliance's website, too, including authorities in Malawi, Colombia, Kenya, India, Moldova, Ghana, the People's Republic of Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Peru, and the Philippines. Some nominally private aid agencies are also involved. On its website, the UN Capital Development Fund boasted of its ongoing schemes to attack cash. bringing about the shift to electronic payments on a global scale and ensuring that these benefits are maximized can be accelerated by an organization dedicated exclusively to providing global advocacy, knowledge sharing, collaboration and guidance on effective practices, it says. The goal of the plan, the UN added, is to encourage governments, development organizations and the private sector to commit to the digital transition, and facilitates the translation of these commitments into action. Of course, the US government has also been a key player supporting the efforts both in the homeland and worldwide via USAID and other bureaucracies. In March, the New American reported that GOP lawmakers in Congress were pushing an Obama-backed scheme that would force every American to have a national ID card containing sensitive biometric data. The plan, which would have made working illegal for anyone who refused to submit, was embedded in an immigration bill. Under the Real ID Act, meanwhile, despite widespread state-level nullification, the federal government is still seeking to impose a national ID on Americans, with the digital photos for those identity documents used to gather biometric data on Americans by bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., and beyond. This summer, Congress, apparently not content to force an unconstitutional ID on only Americans, decided all of humanity needed a national ID card and that American taxpayers or creditors of the U.S. government should finance it. To that end, Congress passed and Obama signed the deceptively named Girls Count Act, introduced by Senator Marco Rubio, AFLA. According to the summary of the legislation, the law makes it U.S. government policy to encourage countries, red governments, to provide birth certifications and other official documentation, enhance and support capacity building in developing countries to design and implement birth registries and more. The law also purports to authorize programs by U.S. bureaucrats overseas on improved civil registration, collection of vital statistics, and more. According to the late Hollywood director Aaron Russo, who made the hit film America, Freedom to Fascism, there is an end goal to all of the controversial ID and anti-cash scheming. That end goal was explained to him by Nick Rockefeller of the infamous Rockefeller dynasty, Russo said publicly. The end goal is to get everybody gypped, to control the whole society, to have the bankers and the elite people control the world, Russo paraphrased Rockefeller as telling him. And indeed, as the New American has reported on multiple occasions, the push to have humans implanted with microchips has been underway for years. For liberty and prosperity to survive into the future, it is imperative that humanity resist the accelerating push to impose universal biometric identification, abolish cash, and curtail the unalienable rights of individuals. Americans, as the people best positioned to stop the agenda and as the people whose government is playing a lead role in the radical plot, have a special duty to stop it. And with education and organized action, stopping the dangerous agenda in its tracks is still possible.